It is the Audible Live Thursday night. Always a special night on Thursday night when we get to hang out near halftime of an actual good game, an actual decent offensive game. What? Maybe Mitchell Trubisky being back in Northern Ohio goes to Mentor. Jared, what's up? Jared from Mentor. Alfredo joining us. They're in the booth tonight. Also, he's going to be joining me on Sunday morning as Chris Allen is on assignments. But let's get to the game, the actual offensively functional game.
So, I mean, wow. If you're not first thinking about two things, one, Nick Chubb is just almost always in that conversation as arguably best running back in the NFL. Maybe not fantasy wise, but my God, can the man just run? You watch, it is poetry in motion. He's had some really nice runs throughout this first half. And you know what? As just as I was about to say that this is easily the worst NFL game of the season, both teams go and decide to score, and Jacoby Brissett's throwing touchdowns to Amari Cooper. It's absolutely wild. And I think the one thing that everyone on every social media platform is going to be talking about is that absolutely ridiculous George Pickens one-handed catch. He's already getting the OBJ comparisons already. And it's just, man, I don't know if the George Pickens hype can get any higher than it is right now.
Yeah, a lot of things to sort through here. I will say Mitchell Trubisky, he's 9 for 13. He was 8 for 9 at one point in this game. And what you saw from Trubisky was when he was outside the pocket, he looked semi-comfortable making downfield throws. They were praising the throw that he made. George Pickens, folks, if you don't get to see it, he's tracking the ball over his shoulder and having to basically contort. It's Matrix stuff, basically. And the thing about George Pickens is, he was doing it in the preseason. He was doing it in training camp. But even, and he has to have ultra focus whenever he gets this one chance and he makes a spectacular play. Steelers just need someone to unlock that talent. And then Najee Harris running well, trucking John Johnson at the goal line and looking good. The foot is fine. Jaylen Warren actually looking pretty good, getting north-south in a hurry and efficient. Had a fumble. So we'll see
almost got stuck on the sideline for the rest of the night with that fumble.
But you can see the Steelers wanting to mix Warren in a little bit more to pace Najee Harris's season, because Harris looks like he's in some ways it was a perfect marriage, Harris and the Steelers, because he doesn't care the record, he doesn't care how bad the offense is, he doesn't care what the score on the scoreboard is. He's going to be that kind of running back. Also, elsewhere on the Steelers side, you see again with Trubisky throwing the ball reasonably well. Deontay Johnson is doing okay. Chase Claypool has a downfield catch and nice gain on end around. On the Cleveland side, guys, I think Jacoby Brissett's going to be starting somewhere next year. I don't know if they have him on a more than 1 year contract, because he's really meshing with this Kevin Stefanski offense. And what do we know with the Stefanski offense? It's going to make the game a little simpler for the quarterback, right? Isn't this what offensive coordinators need to do? And Jacoby Brissett looks like he has completely internalized the scheme. He looks really crisp out there. And he had a beautiful throw on the run to Amari Cooper, who stepped out of bounds on the route, or it would have been a nice 40, 50, 60-yard gain. I don't think we're going to get a lot more questions about whether to start Cooper, guys. I think that you can see that he's emerging as the number one. And David Njoku, the Steelers just have no answer for him. Going into the season, you thought, okay, he's ahead of Harrison Bryant, who's a very good player in his own right, but the Browns not just franchise tagged him, but unlike the Dolphins, they signed him to a long-term contract. You thought they got plans for him. Well, they had plans for him tonight, and he has, I think, 7 for 7 targets, catching all 7. And you see the athleticism, you see the usage. So not a lot of people have him in their lineup. He might even be on waivers. We're going to be talking about on the waiver wire show. And then Nick Chubb. And the one thing, and I'm going to toss it to you, Matt Waldman, just because I see every week, Matt, more people saying, wow, Nick Chubb is amazing. Wow, Nick Chubb is the best running back in football. Wow, wow, wow. And the one thing I'll say about him is he would fit in any era of the NFL, any era. I mean, you put him in the sepia tone era, put him in any era you want. And is it nice, Matt, years later to see people catching up to something you were telling them for a while?
It's just fun. I'll say this. There's nothing more satisfying than watching a Steelers-Browns game and knowing that there is a player on the Browns who can take it to a Steelers defense. To me, that is my favorite thing as a fan, is that there is a back that the Steelers would envy having, and they have a good one in Najee Harris. I'm not downplaying Najee Harris. But I'm sure the Steelers look at Nick Chubb and they're that meme of the guy turning around walking with his girlfriend holding hands like that, because and most teams would be that way. But Nick Chubb, honestly, I think I have a theory with Nick Chubb. The Boston Dynamics has those robots that they're showing the cute little doggies and the humanoids dancing and
those things
doing all that stuff.
me.
And they have that slight undercurrent of terror. Really, the thing that should terrify you is that Nick Chubb is actually the advanced model that they don't want you to know about.
Right.
And that they've been doing this for years. They have the Jim Brown model that they had to retire early because people were catching on to it. He was just way more advanced than any human being could be. And then they had the same problem with Barry Sanders. They tried to have some faults there where he wasn't going to score touchdowns, but they had to retire that early too. I think they got it just right with Nick Chubb, where you really have to watch closely to realize that he's not human. But when you look at this team, like the Njoku, talking about him, I think you brought up a great point. That contract was a friendly contract for the Browns because it's kind of like we would have had to franchise him and pay him more, and we're during the period where we may have to pay him the most amount of money is where we actually have an out. So they took the right chance to sign him the way they did, and it looks like it's paying off. When you talk about Pickens, that catch was incredible, and he's been making catches like that at Georgia for a few years. The thing with him to watch next, and I think he'll be able to do it, is to develop is when he's in tight coverage and he actually has to leap and adjust for a ball, can he do it in the way where he can do it with coverage tight to him and not open his body towards it? Because that's always been a weakness with his game. But everything else, there's so much to love about his game, and you can see the flair for the spectacular. And the Browns, the last thing is that it's not I don't think it's as surprising as we should think about Trubisky getting production right now, because the Browns' defensive backfield, they're designed to play off and play zone, and they're really just don't let the guy get behind you and beat you. And they've been kind of doing that. One of my favorites has been Grant Delpit, and Flacco picked on him incessantly last week. And I think that there's been some coverage busts with that team. They're not playing very good defense on the back end right now, and the whole defense is designed to play good in the back end so that they can give so they basically can give that pass rush time and not get burnt. And they're getting burnt a little too often. They got burnt by Mayfield. They got burnt by Flacco.
Yeah.
And Trubisky's been able to pick them apart as a result.
Yeah, and I would say also, Matt, that they're missing Jadeveon Clowney tonight. Myles Garrett came in with a neck thing. So, yeah, maybe they're relying more on the pass rush. And the other thing is, remember, and this game's 14-13 Steelers right now. We'll see how it goes. The Browns should be 2-0 and easily 2-0. They had to scramble to win in week 1 after they were up 23-10, coverage lapse. And I've talked about this on my shows all week, that I feel like the story of the first 2 weeks of the NFL is you can be thoroughly outplaying a team, but you can't emotionally check out. You can't say, okay, we got this. This game is over, because we've seen it how many times now this year already? 5, 6, 7 times. It almost happened to the Rams last week, where no matter how much better you are than a team on a given day, if you emotionally let your guard down and say, we won, and I call it like walking into the ring with your gloves down, you're going to get decked. Yeah. These are still professionals. Go ahead.
And Bloom, I mean, I just wonder, Miles Jack hasn't been a horrible linebacker in his career. He was a high-end pick, but now that he's in Pittsburgh, I don't know about you, but I always thought he was maybe a better running back than he was a linebacker. Right. And with the line, with TJ Watt out and with the linebackers, they have been more pass rush oriented. You'd have to also think that Njoku's feasting on that a fair bit, too.
Yeah, I think so. That's just the Steelers for you. Vince Williams. There's always that guy you can pick on, LaVon Kirkland. There's always someone you can pick on in the middle of that defense. All right. We'll continue to watch this game unfold. My point in bringing up the Browns thing, though, is they could easily right now be 2-0 and trying to get to 3-0 with the Bengals. They got to beat a Jets team that's got some ideas. They're getting ideas, or they could fall 0-3. Okay, Alfredo. Let's talk Kyle Pitts. And I don't think this is necessarily about those start-sit decisions, because I still think it's hard to think of a scenario where you're not going to start Kyle Pitts at tight end. There's some DFS implications here, or otherwise just maybe like Bob Harris was saying on the couch 2 weeks ago, relax. Are we telling people relax because it is Seattle And is this going to be the game that reminds people why they spent a 3rd round pick on Kyle Pitts?
Yeah, I don't think you're necessarily going to get this massive blowout game simply just because I don't know that this team has the same type of passing volume that the Matt Ryan era Falcons have had in the past. And now with the addition of Drake London, there's a lot of factors there. But yes, this is patient time. This game should be something he literally has nowhere to go but up. We're talking about a guy who's getting targeted very few times. The Falcons right now are 23rd in pass attempts in the league. Marcus Mariota, he's running a lot more than Matt Ryan ever did. And I know that a lot of fantasy people were talking about that, but I don't think everyone really correlated and connected the dots at how much that really does take away the target volume from these guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts. That extra 5-6 times a game that Marcus Mariota is running, that's going to take away 2-3 targets from one of those guys. So those extra times, maybe in the red zone, right? Where the last game, they did not look for Kyle Pitts in the red zone. Arthur Smith and the Falcons did everything they could to get that ball into literally everyone else's hands. Cordero Patterson, Olamide, Zacchaeus, like every single other person that wasn't Kyle Pitts was getting touches in the red zone. And then there's just not a whole lot of like creativity. But I think that what we're seeing now is everyone has been asking Arthur Smith and everyone has been asking Kyle Pitts and what's going on with the production, right? And I feel like we see this all the time where the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah.
And, like that's probably one of the most overused phrases in fantasy football, that we're always just ready for that person to get the production. But I think that is what we're going to see this week for Kyle Pitts. He's had some of the tougher matchups in the first 2 weeks, going up against the Saints and the Rams, who they also, the Rams also they shut down Dawson Knox pretty well too. Not saying that he's on the same level as Kyle Pitts, but Pitts has had some tough matchups. He's got an easier matchup this week. I think there's going to be a little bit more focus of using him in more creative ways. Last year, I feel like the Falcons got him in space a lot and let him just be athletic and do exactly what he excels at, which is just being a freak. And this year, it seems a lot more like there's just a lot of like little crossing patterns and weird up the sideline routes that he's doing where Mariota's just kind of tossing it up, and it's not really conducive to Kyle Pitts being productive. But I think there's going to be a little bit of a shift in the mentality there.
Yeah, you're definitely not seeing Arthur Smith scheme stuff up for Kyle Pitts. And you mentioned those matchups the first 2 weeks. For Kyle Pitts, those matchups were what? Marshawn Lattimore, Jalen Ramsey, and he's not there yet. And I think that we've seen some talk in the chat room about Drake London. I think this also, from a fantasy football perspective, lots of talk around the fantasy football world about how thin the waiver wire has been through 2 weeks. I think one of the ways you can refocus your energies is on trades, on throwing out trade offers. And maybe it is a time to throw out a trade offer for Kyle Pitts, because Matt, I do think that when we look back at the games last year where Kyle Pitts went off, it feels like that was the kind of matchup that he's going to get this weekend against Seattle.
Well, hopefully. And I think that there's two things to way to look at that. I love what Alfredo talked about with how he's not being used the way that you would like, because 50% of his routes were against cornerbacks.
Yeah.
And if you look at Mark Andrews, if you look at some of the other top tight ends, that range is only in the 20 and 30% range at best. And they're matched up against linebackers and safeties, and that's what you want with Kyle Pitts. But the problem with matching up a player like that is, yes, you have to do some scheming and to do that, and maybe either create set plays that opposing defenses usually find out and like stop after 3 or 4 weeks and continue to make better ones, which is on the onus is on the offensive minds on the team, or your quarterback has to do a good job of being able to read the entire field and do it from a pocket that gets compromised at times. And where Marcus Mariota, as Alfredo also brought up, will run the ball, that means it does take away from his second and third reads. And when you look at the concepts that they run in this offense, they're trying to keep Marcus Mariota from making high-end decisions. They run a lot of mirrored concepts, meaning that each route on each side of the field is the same route. The inside receivers run the same sail routes. The outside receivers run the same out routes or in routes under it. Whatever type of route construction they have, it's the same thing. What that meant is to make it easier for a guy to read the field. With Matt Ryan, you could have 4 or 5 very different routes being run and different levels, and Ryan retains that information and processes it fast. Mariota does not do that very well. And they've encouraged him to run, obviously, use his legs and get the most of that. So the wild card is Mariota really going to be able to support this out of Pitts? Now, to me, you're not going to be able to trade him away and get a good deal for him. If you have him, you're going to want to keep him and hope that they do make the adjustments. And at worst case scenario, maybe Desmond Ridder comes in and maybe while he's more the wild card who might force the ball into coverage, you might want that, even though it may not work out for you if you wanted him as your quarterback. At least for now, he's going to try and be a little more aggressive. Whereas Mariota, I think, has had the hammer put down on him enough times in his career that he's trying to just play careful, which means 1, 2, 3, first read isn't open, second read, oops, let me run, and not spend too much time trying to be the hero because he's gotten the hero beat out of him.
Yeah, I think that's a correct assessment. But I think absolutely if you want to trade Kyle Pitts, if you're tired of it, you want to wait after this week. And I think you mentioning Desmond Ridder, and maybe it is that rare scenario where the rookie quarterback is an upgrade from the starter because of a little more aggressiveness. But I think if you look at Seattle's defense, they're really young in the secondary. Jordan Brooks is a liability in coverage. And not that Jamal Adams was kind of a liability in coverage too. He's out. It's a shorthanded defense. And I think we saw last year why Kyle Pitts' 1,000-yard season last year was a little bit deceptive is I don't know the exact number, but I would say probably about 40% of his production came in 3 games. I think this is very likely to be one of those 3 games this year. And he's just a very matchup intensive player. And that's one of the things I think at this point in his career, I think there's going to be a point in his career where he won't be. I think we're not there yet. All right, I got to ask you, Alfredo. We were talking some South Florida stuff. I didn't even bring up. I didn't even bring up Highlight. You got the Tua jersey in the background there.
Yep.
So, and much like I'm the neurotic Steelers fan, as we're watching the Steelers game unfold, I know that you might be biased or otherwise. You might have to correct for emotionally how you're invested in this. But what we saw last week was something that we don't see. Is it something that should put us on? And it's Buffalo this week. Boy, the schedule makers gave us a gift for it to be Buffalo. And it's a Buffalo secondary that's banged up. Their 2 most experienced corners are going to be out. Their safeties, which is the key to their secondary, they're both banged up. Probably going to play, but they're banged up. And the other permutation here is Mike McDaniel. And I don't feel like Mike McDaniel is going to be the kind of coach that has to be limited to what coaches have done before. I don't expect him to be a coach that is going to be worried about. It's kind of like early career Belichick, right? Well, what if you try something no one's tried before and you fail? Or isn't the media going to eat you a lot? No. So with all that in mind, what are you expecting? How are you advising folks on players like Raheem Mostert, players like Mike Gesicki? Tua Tagovailoa is a player that either you should be trading for him because people are waiting for more evidence, or you should be trading him away because it was just a tired, banged up Ravens secondary that runs 6,000 yards. I mean, it's one of these 2 stories is going to end up being true. Which one do you think it's going to be?
You know what? I think that Tua Tagovailoa, he may not turn into that superstar quarterback, but I think that he has got the perfect situation right now where Mike McDaniel, he talked about this all offseason, and it's just putting his players in the best position to succeed. And I think that what he's been able to do, it's almost like that old school coach that just runs the ball, and eventually pops off for a big play. And it's almost like that's what he's doing with the passing game, where he's just lulling these defenses to sleep with some quick crossers, some quick screens. And then all of a sudden, boom, we've got that deep ball that's open. And Mike McDaniel, when you mentioned his name, I smiled.
Yeah,
that is the first time that I have done that when someone's mentioned a Dolphins coach in so long. And I didn't have that cool privilege of watching Dan Marino. I didn't become a Dolphins fan until literally the year after he finished and he retired. So I started watching with like Damon Heward and Jay Fiedler and those guys. I've never really experienced a good Miami Dolphins team. This last game against the Ravens was the most excitement I have ever had. And I think, man, this is kind of weird to say, I think, after such a great rookie season from him, but I think that people were still too low on Jalen Waddle and how good he could truly be. I think in week 1, we saw a guy that, took a quick slant to the house by just splitting the defenders in the middle of the field. It was, oh, okay, well, he got lucky on one long touchdown. And then immediately he was the volume guy again in this game. So from the receiver standpoint, I think that you're pretty safe with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill throughout the rest of the season. They are going to find ways to scheme these guys, and I don't think you ever have to think twice about starting them. Tua, I think, is going to be a little bit more matchup dependent. I'm a big Dolphins fan. I don't let my biases take over when it comes to fantasy. I would not be starting him this week. At least I'll wait and see what the injury reports are against the Bills secondary, right? Because Dane Jackson, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, a whole bunch of guys that are popping up on that injury report. So if you have all 3 of those guys out, maybe I'm considering it. And then when you talk about the running backs too, you mentioned Raheem Mostert, Chase Edmonds is, at least at this point, you have to think from a fantasy perspective, kind of a flop. I think that a lot of people were
he's
saying
an injury upside backup, but at least it's Raheem Mostert ahead of him.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people were saying, like, he's that guy that's just outside the running back dead zone. That's just such a great pick to get when you're going 0 RB or whatever you want to call it. And it really hasn't been it. He's been there. I think that a lot of people didn't realize that when Chase Edmonds was brought into Miami, he was brought in because he knows the scheme well. He can fit into the playbook, and he can pass block really well. And that kind of stuff doesn't show up in the fantasy points. And because of those little instances there, he's been able to get some receptions on the outside, but he hasn't been the primary guy that's running the ball when it is a for sure run play. It's been Raheem Mostert coming in. And then when they get in the goal line, they're really not running all that much. So when it comes to the rushing attack, this is a team that's very hard to figure out. And as happy as I am that they're winning, I want no part of that rushing attack, no matter how explosive it could be when it comes to fantasy.
All right, Matt, I'm going to try to say something smart, but I'm going to hand it over to you to say something that's actually smart. Because Mike McDaniel, and I remember saying when he got hired, what's really exciting about this for us is he's the closest thing there is to one of us as an NFL head coach. And one of my good friends actually texted me. I think he said he saw in a press conference or in an interview, Mike McDaniel saying, unbeknownst to you, well, let me get the exact quote because I want to get this right. Unbeknownst to you, I've named all my players animals. I mean, this is great. This is great. I mean, he's cooler than the other side of the pillow, but I think he also has that quality where he's not. It reminds me of Chip Kelly with the Eagles the first 2 years. Remember, and Matt, you and I talked about this a lot. Nick Foles had one of the most efficient seasons in NFL history under Chip Kelly.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yes, an offensive approach, especially if you have the right personnel, a good offensive line, and we'll see about the offensive line part. It can make a game really easy for the quarterback. And there are things that you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to take that many deep shots. You're not allowed to make defensive backs run. What about wearing out your own players and all those things? Mike McDaniel doesn't care. But where I think this gets really interesting, Matt, is I don't think Mike McDaniel is going to stay stuck in, okay, well, that worked. Now I have to keep doing that. I think Mike McDaniel understands that the ebb and flow, the pendulum of the NFL is that now defenses are going to be on their heels. Now defenses are going to go in and say, well, we can't let that happen to us. We can't let that happen to us in the fourth quarter. Matt, I almost wonder if teams are going to start doing something like a hockey line approach with their defensive backs against Miami. So that in the fourth quarter, because this is why it reminds me of Chip Kelly, because the idea is whatever happens in the first 3 quarters, we're going to wear you down so that by the fourth quarter, you're going to be making mental mistakes, or you're just not going to be able to stay stride for stride with guys that you could stay with in the first quarter, and then you're done. And I think that I expect that teams, defensive coordinators are going to go in and say, we can't let what happened to the Ravens happen to us. But I think Mike McDaniel knows that. And that's why I think Mike Gesicki and Raheem Mostert become really interesting players, because I don't think he's going to remain static. I don't think he's going to have a lesson taught to him or shown. I think he may be that coach that will be teaching the lessons. Was this game like to put everyone on notice about this offense? Because for fantasy, we need to take, if you took notice of the Chip Kelly offense in Philly and said, no, this is actually something different, you profited in fantasy football. Is this a similar situation, or is this just me telling myself stories?
I think that I think that when you look at this, at the very least, what you'll see that they're doing to scheme, say, Waddle open, by the use of Tyreek Hill. Like one of the plays that impressed me is putting Tyreek Hill in the backfield in the red zone and running a
wide receiver
tunnel
screens
screen.
don't work at the goal
Yeah.
line. Why
It
would
does.
you ever run that play in the NFL?
It does when you put Tyreek Hill in the backfield and half the line and half the box goes there, and now you've matched up 2 offensive linemen against 2 defensive backs for Jalen Waddle to run through a tunnel that's huge now because you've got 2 earth movers, knocking down pine trees. So, I mean, that's basically what happened there. So I think at the very least, you're going to see it flip-flop where you'll start seeing Jalen Waddle be the draw for scheme plays to Hill. And you'll start seeing some of those things happen, or scheme plays to Mostert. So they may run the same plays, but the variations will be enough with personnel and with alignments that it'll be disguised well, because that's all you really need to do. You don't have to come up with entirely different plays. And the wonderful thing about it is what Alfredo said about Jalen Waddle. I mean, yeah, I had Jalen Waddle graded just behind Jamar Chase. It was Chase, Waddle, and Bateman 1, 2, 3 last year for the RSP, and it was really Chase here, Waddle here, and Bateman down here, where Bateman would have been number 1 any other year. But those 2 other guys were that good. And Waddle just got used in a Jarvis Landry type of situation, really, in Miami, because they didn't have anybody else, and they wanted to put him in the middle of the field or in the shallow perimeter more often so that they could give him a lot of volume as opposed to giving him a lot of the big play opportunities. And they didn't really have maybe the imaginative of offense to do it either. But now, I mean, eventually the pendulum is going to turn where you're going to start seeing some big opportunities for the likes of Mostert, for the likes of Waddle, who, to me, I mean, there's not much of a difference between Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in terms of like athletic ability. There's a little bit more zip out of Tyreek Hill, and he's a little better of a runner in terms of contact balance. But in terms of speed, open field vision, and I would say Waddle's tougher at the catch point than Tyreek Hill is. I think he's a better route runner than Tyreek Hill is in terms of every type of route that he can run. So they can pretty much switch spots. And I think Mike McDaniels knows that. And I think, yeah, you're going to see things where teams start to overcorrect for Waddle, torching them in the first half of the season. And then Hill's going to start going off a little bit more. But right now, I mean, they were pretty much dead even. I think they're already doing that to an extent, based on the fact that they had, almost, over 350 yards of offense and 2 touchdowns, between them. So I'd be starting Tua this week. I mean, I know Alfredo's being cautious, and I understand that, but I would gladly start him, especially with those guys being banged up, even if they're starting, because knowing that unless they're sandbagging just to try and trick people, and I don't see them being that imaginative. The Bills are going to, if they have that banged up of a secondary and they're going against the tight margin of error that these speedsters have, yeah, give me that all day long. I'll take that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we talked about this way back after the Tyreek Hill trade earlier in the offseason, Matt, that they are interchangeable. And I mean, you could even do, and I love the way you point out that the idea is, and this is Kyle Shanahan offense, right, is you have plays that look exactly the same to the defense, and then depending on the decisions the defense make, or you anticipate, you watch how they played it the last time, and you say, okay, but they're not gonna let us get what we got last time, but that's okay because we have built into the play design. As long as you have a quarterback that has a fast processor and good eyes, it's going to work. And this is why San Francisco becomes a lot more interesting. Heart hurts for Trey Lance, but there's just no doubt that the value of every player in the San Francisco offense went up. You're nodding along, Alfredo. What did you think about the fantasy effect of the Trey Lance injury?
So I always thought that the Trey Lance being the starting quarterback for San Francisco was really good for Trey Lance. And I think everyone thought that, right? Like, he was the consensus breakout quarterback. He's the next Jalen Hurts, all that fun stuff. But I don't know. I felt like I was one of the few people that I hopped on Dave Klukie's show here on Footballguys, and I was saying I want no part of Deebo Samuel this year just because I don't know what Trey Lance is going to be. And at the draft cost that you have to get Deebo Samuel, he has to be either he has to be my round 1 pick or the beginning of my round 2 at that turn. And that worried me. And so now I'm looking out at people in my league, and I'm seeing the guy that has George Kittle on his roster specific. I'm gonna give you a very specific example that maybe doesn't help a lot of people, and it's a little too niche, but that's fine.
Yeah.
There's a manager in my league that's got 3 tight ends rostered on his team. This is a redraft league, and he's got George Kittle that's been out the whole season, and I'm sending offers to him like, hey, I want George Kittle on my roster now that Jimmy G is there. I feel so much more comfortable there because we know what we have, right? It's the devil that you do know, and I'm cool with that because I know that Jimmy Garoppolo, he's probably not that dynamic of a quarterback himself for fantasy, but we know what we can get from his skill players around him. I think that the big factor in that offense is going to be Brandon Ayuk. How much more is he going to be used, and how much is he going to develop this season? Because I think that could just throw a big monkey wrench into everything.
Yeah, this is Sunday night, San Francisco at Denver, and I have a feeling you're going to hear more boos, a lot of boos in the Denver stadium. I don't remember what the name of it is now. If the loyal folks of the show, I know that's everyone here tonight. Thank you, everybody, always for turning out in the middle of an actual compelling game on a Thursday night between these two teams. The show within the show on the Audible is there's the Audible, and then there's the show within the show is how is it affecting Cecil Lammey to cover the Broncos? And actually, the crowd is kind of aligned with Cecil now. They're not exactly accepting what's out there. And I'm afraid San Francisco, you mentioned Brandon Ayuk, Alfredo. Patrick Surtain is almost certainly out for that game. Yeah. And Denver has faced Geno Smith and Davis Mills. So, I mean, that's one of the things I'm going to be watching in week 3 is you look at some of these defenses and you look at some of the offenses too. And you look at their competition for the first 2 weeks, and there's going to be a rude awakening. This is going to be bad. I mean, it's going to be something where your intensity level better be up, or there's going to be a lot of questions to answer after the game about what went wrong. So we've talked about San Francisco. We talked about the fantasy value of these players. I guess, Matt, I always like throwing you open-ended questions. I always like seeing where your mind goes when I ask you this. But, I mentioned teams that we may see, because we continue to adjust, right? We look at New England's defensive performance in week 1. Now we say not so bad, actually, maybe pretty good, maybe really good. And we're always recontextualizing what happened early in the season based on the next data point. What's a next data point that you're looking forward to seeing this weekend?
I want to see continued level of spreading the field or spreading the ball around the field for the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that the fact that Devontae Adams had a 17 target game and in that game Waller and Renfro still had 18% target share is a very strong indicator that those guys are not busts, and that you should continue to roll with them, even though people are ready to hop off that train. I'm also waiting to see whether or not, I think that while everyone in Denver is kind of down with that defense, and they're also freaking out about Russell Wilson, as I've joked today and this week in my column, it's cool to hate Russell Wilson, but it's not going to be very productive. I think that's true. I just think that he's always a slow starter to an extent. And I don't remember what I tracked, but I can look it up really quickly and just say that from what I tracked, there were 9 drops in the past 2 weeks of pinpoint passes. When the games I charted, there were 6 dropped passes that happened in the end zone. 6 dropped passes. And if you counted just points, the differential between the field goals that they actually kicked and the drop passes that he had, that's 12 points. In fantasy points, that was 16 points. The difference between being the 17th ranked quarterback and the number 7 ranked quarterback, or the 8th ranked quarterback just behind Justin Herbert. And if you added the yards to it, he would have been ahead of Herbert, in those situations. I saw very little about Russell Wilson that made me go, he's bad. He's just corny. Fine. He's just corny. I don't care. He's corny.
In the dictionary, look up corny and you'll see his picture.
You'll see his picture. And that's okay, because really underneath that corniness is really his disguise of hiding the psychopath killer that he is on the field. I've always said that he is Michael Corleone. It's composed, friendly, And then as we tell the story about Cecil interviewing and me seeing him like freak out at the idea of backing up Tim Tebow and nearly want to kick Cecil's behind, and Cecil go, "You caught that?" And I'm like, yeah, that made me want to look at him, because all good quarterbacks are either raging narcissists, as me and Russ Landy talked about this week, are either raging narcissists or they're killers inside. They've got to be. They have to have that belief inside after getting the mess kicked out of them and having failure after failure to come back and do what they do. So I'm looking for, with the things that I saw, and he's played well with some of the Seattle receivers before Metcalf and Lockett, and even when Baldwin would be out, and made good players out of them. I mean, we're talking about Javon, we're talking about Jermaine Kearse, we're talking about Paul Richardson, who I liked, but never really panned out the way that you wanted to. Freddie Swain, the mess of tight ends after their prime. Yeah, I'm in on the Broncos offense, especially that defense isn't playing well. So I'm looking for, please trade me Russell Wilson. I'll be glad to pick him up for you. You can even throw in a sweetener for me, because I know, wink, wink, that, he's corny and he's not cool, and they're not playing well. Just give me more. That's good.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he responds to expectations and being the fall guy in some ways for Nathaniel Hackett. That's the other thing. Nathaniel Hackett. I mean, there's In Over Your Head, and then there's Nathaniel Hackett.
Well, we had Pete Carroll, and Russell Wilson's literally since 2012 is plus 269 points over their opponent in the fourth quarter. He has tied for the most fourth quarter comebacks in the league. I mean, they'll, at worst, Russell will play street ball. And if he needs to play street ball to win, he's got Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy to help him out. And Sutton's look good.
Yeah, Sutton's look good. And if it is a good game for Wilson, it'll probably be Sutton catching like 200 yards, because, like you said, the drop balls and Jeudy is almost certainly out. The tight ends aren't giving him that much help. Albert O and company. It's a great story to follow here. Football not for the well-adjusted, and just what's going to happen with Denver, because it sure looks like Nathaniel Hackett is a one and done, but Russell Wilson might take a lot of the blame for the team not living up to expectations this year. So we'll see. Alfredo, tell me something you're looking forward to seeing this weekend that will help you understand what you saw already.
Oh man, that's an awesome question. I hate to repeat the topic that we already talked about, but I am just, my inner fandom is so excited for this Miami Dolphins Buffalo Bills game, because it's, what's crazy is that I've talked to so many different Miami Dolphins fans, whether it's on Twitter or in person, and it sucks because all of them have said the same thing, which is, I don't expect us to win, but if we're competitive, I'm just happy. And I hate to see it. That's where we are as a fan base, that we're okay with losing. We just want to actually look like a football team. And so I'm really excited for that this weekend of, maybe, someone might say it's still too small of a sample size, but to see Tua go out and be able to compete with Josh Allen after the Bills have had the Dolphins number every single year for the past, ever since Josh Allen has been their quarterback there. Tua went out and competed with Lamar Jackson. The team looked good. And now here's another big test. And I, as a fan, as a fantasy analyst, and as someone who has, Dolphins players rostered, I really want to see if this team and this offense can be for real. The talk about Mike McDaniel is so much fun. Whenever I think of Mike McDaniel, I imagine him as the head coach of the team in The Waterboy, where he's talking about, like, he's trying to figure out the plays, and he's like, okay, we fake. No, we pretend to fake. No, we fake the fake. Yeah. I don't know where I am. And it's like, that's just who Mike McDaniel, like, he starts going on these tangents of these crazy plays, and we already saw this. And so I'm excited to really find out if this team is for real and if these players can be fantasy relevant.
Alfredo, have you been in a draft with Adam Harstad yet?
I have not. I have not.
Well, I'm going to explain this to you. Mike McDaniel is Adam Harstad looking at Jason Wood square in the face and giving him a little wink as he snipes him or completely owns him in some trash talking. That's where we're at. Yeah, I love you, Wood.
Yeah, we definitely love Jason, an OFBG, and it is fun, and it is fun to think. I sent Eric Stoner, Matt. We were texting about Mike McDaniel, and I sent him like Ogre, was that his name from Revenge of the Nerds? Nerds, like that's gonna be how I know that Mike McDaniel was on the Yale football team, but they barely let him on the field. He did rule in the weight room, but he showed up like 150. And hey, even at Yale, 150-pound football player is going to have a tough time fitting in, but he's fitting in the NFL head coach circles, and it is a beautiful thing. And
did they deadlift him?
He won. Yeah, right. He won the pound for pound as a senior. He won the pound for pound strongest man on the team award. The only thing I'll say, I'm really getting off into like editorial stuff. I say I just wish Stephen Ross wasn't the one who's going to be benefiting from that. But the Miami Dolphins fan base. Okay, I want to make sure to get this in because we have to talk before we go. Brought to you by Sleep.
It's time for the Sleeper of the Week, powered by Sleeper.
The sleeper of the week. I'm going to tell you all my sleeper of the week, and really, we're going to sleep. Well, maybe not. Maybe this is where we wake up, and we already talked about this team. I don't want to talk about a player. I want to hear what each of you have to think about it. And I'll first tee it up for you, Alfredo. And I get it, okay, folks. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying to plug him in your lineup, although I would be open to it. Certainly, if I get questions when Alfredo and I get back together Sunday morning with this player, I might pause and say, as my classic Bloom saying, I'm not going to talk you out of it. I wouldn't necessarily do it, but I'm not going to talk you out of it. I'm not going to talk you out of playing the sleeper of the week, Ken Walker the third. And he'll be still your beating heart, Alfredo. And I think it's just this simple. And I wonder what Seattle saw. But what I saw, and in all due respect to Rashad Penny, I know Penny was a first rounder and Walker was a second rounder. Walker's got it, man. He's got the juice. I mean, he looks ready. Now, will they feed him enough? I don't know. This is going to be a game script that should be at least, Atlanta's not going to run away from Seattle. And I think this is one of those situations where he came back from his hernia surgery. He looked fine last week. They eased him in. You could tell that when he was on the field, they wanted to give him the ball. And they did, and they got to see. It doesn't necessarily result in production, but I think it resulted, if you're the coaches, especially if you're like Pete Carroll, you're thinking, more of this. Alfredo, what do you think of my sleeper of the week?
So the way to my heart, Sigmund, and that's Kenneth Walker. He is my like Diet Coke version of Nick Chubb. I love everything that Kenneth Walker does. And it's funny because for as I guess as boring as that first week was for him coming off of the injury and he didn't get too many touches, he still led the entire backfield in opportunities, so carries and targets combined. So despite Travis Homer being out there and getting work and Rashad Penny getting work, Ken Walker coming off of a hernia injury as a rookie in this offense, he led the team in opportunities. He was still out there catching passes too. The thing that I was told that he's not allowed to do, like he just doesn't even have hands or arms, but yeah, he's out there catching passes. He caught 2 passes on 3 targets. So I really hope that we can see them sort of expand his role a little bit. And I think that even just from some of the quotes that we heard from Pete Carroll this last week about, I'm ready to open up the passing game a little bit more. We'll see if that's just, him just talking to the media, or if they're actually going to do something a little bit different and actually get Ken Walker involved and let it be that little jolt of energy. What I thought was really cool was when they got into the red zone, the Seahawks, they kept employing a lot of Ken Walker wildcat. And that is really interesting because it makes me wonder how much they trust Geno Smith getting down into the red zone. And, how much that shows to me a lot of trust in a guy like Ken Walker early in his career, his first game back off injury. And you're like, you know what? We're on the precipice of scoring. Let's give it to the rookie and let him take a wildcat snap, not even just a basic running back snap. So I do like it. I like Ken Walker. The way to my heart.
Yeah, this could be the week that he announces his presence to the league. Matt, get your RSP, folks, mattwaldman.com, because you already would have known about everything there was to know, at least up to this point, about Ken Walker. Do you think he's going to be relevant this year? Maybe not week 3, but this year?
Yeah, I think he will. I think he's a very refined back. And I think the thing with Rashad Penny had to learn how to be more of a zone runner. And it took a couple years because he was naturally a gap runner. And that's the simplest form of running. Now we're seeing more we're seeing more gap runners, more gap plays every year that the defenses go lighter and played spread out with nickel. But Pete likes to run some of that zone, and you like a back who can do a little bit of everything. To me, I always, if he's like the Diet Coke, I would say he's more like he's like the little can of Coke, that still packs a punch, whereas Chubb's kind of more like the one you get at 7-Eleven in the styrofoam cup that's a little heavier, packs and no ice in it at all. But I would say that he reminded me of a Ray Rice, like very refined. Maybe and that's a little before some people's time. And maybe they think of the infamy of how Ray Rice's career ended and how he ended it for himself with the domestic abuse. But, at the same time, he was a very, just thinking purely on the field, he was a refined runner, very patient, had good balance, very good quickness, and nice ability for his size in terms of the power that he could deliver. And and Alfredo is right. He can catch the ball. It's just one of those things that, people don't see catch stats. They don't see the film of what the mechanics are. And the mechanics have always been there for him. So, I think that the fact that they like the diversity and versatility of what he can do is what makes a difference.
Yeah, I think while we're staying with on the whole Coke analogy, it's funny. My wife is 4 years younger than me, which is usually not that big of a deal generationally, but every now and then there's something that I experienced growing up that she didn't. And I actually was explaining to her the other night why it's called Coca-Cola Classic. Why isn't it just called Coca-Cola and New Coke and all that? But I'll go back to this as something that was very enjoyable during the time I lived in Texas. Let's just say that Kenneth Walker can be Coca-Cola or Coca-Cola Classic. Nick Chubb is like what we always call it Mexican Coke, with the real sugar.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yep.
So, but hey, Coca-Cola, this is not brought to you by Coca-Cola, brought to you by Sleeper.
Nick Chubb is Jack and Coke, actually.
There you go. Exactly.
And a lot more Jack than Coke.
right. It's embracing. Folks, it's always a wonderful, stimulating experience to get to spend time with wonderful Football Guys staff members, Alfredo and Matt, and with all of y'all joining us during a football game. Again, a compelling football game as Cade York, the rookie kicker, puts Cleveland ahead. Let's all go watch a very interesting fourth quarter and get ready for week 3. We want to spend our time with you always. Again, Alfredo and I will be back on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. here on the YouTube channel to answer your start-sit questions. I have to say that really slow, guys, or I'm going to say sorry, Joe. I'm not going to say sorry, Joe. I'm going to say thank you, everybody, because you're so classy.